Hello, I'm the Toycat, and welcome back to the second channel video. Today I have some more Geography of Toycat for you all. It's the second series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about a very particular part of the world which we don't really ever get to focus on because, yeah, there's usually a slight, European bias to the geography on these channels because obviously that's where I'm from. It's where my brain is kind of focused. However, I did today want to talk about China because even if you're really into your East Asian geography, you might be confused when you hear on the news about, oh yeah, there's the two Chinas and there's the one China policy though, or the one China two system. You might be confused at all those terms and how they kind of meld together, and to be honest, it is a little bit of a confusing system. So I figured, why not explain all the special bits of China in today's video, because it is a giant country I'd love to cover in a video one day, but for today I figured, why not at least go through, exactly, all the weird asterisks attached, because it is kind of like a one China 5 system things, where, there's parts of China which are really fully on China, but they've got special rules of their own, and then there's parts of China which are technically full on China, but they have their own everything, and then there's a part of China which China swears that it owns, but that is called Taiwan, and that is not actually owned by them in the slightest. It's confusing. Let's explain it today. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. So let's get straight into it by, I guess blowing your mind a bit, because when I first saw this map, it blew my mind. Basically, because China is such a densely populated country, it's got over 1 billion people living there. It's like the 4th largest country just by land area, 2nd largest by population after India, and largest economy, largest in lots of things. China's a big country. It's a big deal. Basically, if you look at this map right here, the circle, which is inverted, has more people living inside there than live outside of it. Again, this kind of blew my mind a little bit, because statistically, if you're watching this video and you're watching YouTube, you probably live outside the circle. So yeah, more people live over here than live in the rest of the world combined. Isn't that kind of cool? But yeah, let's move on from that and let's actually talk about China, because like I said, there's kind of like a one China 5 systems thing. I wanted to mostly focus on the 3 kind of external ones, but I'll go into the special economic zones later. But let's go from easiest to hardest to talk about, because I'd say Macau is probably the easiest of the kind of things. If you know Hong Kong at all, Macau is kind of like Portuguese China or Portuguese Hong Kong, and the Portuguese wanted like a trading point in the 1400s, so they came over and they just rented Macau from the Chinese for some decent amount of money per year for how many years it took, and then they could do all their trading and exciting stuff from Macau. Rather interesting to me, at least, is the fact that they kind of just kept this agreement going peacefully for a very long time until the 1970s, when they overthrew their government. There was like a carnation revolution, and they decided to just get rid of their overseas possessions, so they just got rid of Macau. And although Macau wasn't fully ever given back to the Chinese government, like it's still a Portuguese-administered Chinese territory. It's now temporarily Portuguese-administered Chinese territory. However, again, it still has its own whole own separate, set of things. It's a capitalist country, and in fact, it's not just capitalist. It's the richest country by GDP per capita in the entire world, depending on how you measure this. But still, Macau is the richest place in the world because it has so much gambling going on, so much tourism, and basically, Macau, very wealthy place. And it's also the most densely populated place in the entire world too. Pretty cool facts, right? But yeah, I just kind of show off the densely populated thing. Let's just zoom in on a random point. So again, I love Street View because you can just pick a random place. So we're in the Cathedral Parish, which is probably a horrible place to pick. Yeah, this doesn't show it at all. Okay, no, never mind. We got some apartment buildings anyway. But yeah, basically Macau is very, very densely populated. I closed my little window. It's very densely populated, over 20,000 people per square kilometer, which when you think about it is quite a lot. So yeah, basically, very, very busy place, that is Macau, and it's the easiest one to explain because it's Portuguese China that was given back, that's not fully given back, and that's why it has separate rules, because it's entirely autonomous, by pretty much any measure you can think of, and as a result, it kind of just, awkwardly tags along with China, but is a very, very different little thing. So yeah, bear in mind, these are for the People's Republic of China, not the Republic of China, which is a separate thing. So yeah, with that said, now we've talked about Macau, let's talk about Hong Kong, which is a little bit more complex, because again, it was by the British, and, British Empire, something. But yeah, basically Hong Kong was actually British owned and British controlled until 1997. That was the full handoff date, because basically, again, Hong Kong was a similar story to Macau, a little bit more violent. There was a bit of violence involved in the taking of it, I believe, where they just kind of fell back and were like, oh yeah, we're just going to take this island and we'll give some money, whatever. So yeah, that is Hong Kong. It was, a part of the British Empire for the longest time, and it was one of the last British Empire properties to actually be ceded, again, 1997, like Tony Blair if you're from the UK. So yeah, that recently is when Hong Kong went, and as a result of being Britain, but in the in being Britain, but in China. There's some really interesting things about this, including that it's such a global trading hub. There's 7 million people living in this place, which means that it's not the most densely populated place. Again, there goes Macau, but it's something like 4th or 3rd on any list you look at. Basically, it's a very densely populated place. It's so densely populated that their airport, it's somewhere around here, is built on an artificial island. Their land is so valuable per square foot, I think the most in the world, that if you wanted to build something, what you want to do is you just build an island, and that's what they did. Their airport is built on an artificial island, which is pretty cool if you ask me. So yeah, Hong Kong is an entirely like, again, self kind of governed thing, where basically China technically, says this is part of their country, but they speak English as well as the, Chinese here. They have their own currency as well, the Hong Kong dollar. There's, again, it's a very crazy thing. There's a border between Hong Kong and the rest of China. It's called, part of the China, but it realistically still is, to this day, a very separate place with very separate things. And in fact, the funny thing about the, the kind of governing of this is when they agreed that, the British would leave, that was in 1897, if I wasn't mistaken. They just said, oh yeah, in 100 years, we'll sort this out then. And then 100 years later came, and they're like, well, we're going to leave, but let's just say 25 years you'll agree to be, part of, for the next 25 years, you'll agree to just keep on being, self-governed and all that sort of stuff. And that time actually runs out very shortly. I think it's 2022, if I'm not mistaken, from 1997. And then after that, we're still not really sure where it's going. So basically, Hong Kong is just in this perpetual status of like, let's keep the status quo, but that could be ending at some point soon. So yeah, that is Hong Kong, the second like kind of special part of China that's China, but it's not really China. It just happens to also kind of be China. Again, it's hard to say, but that's that right there. And let's move on to the third part of China, which is sort of really China, and it's a lot bigger than these two. Again, that's Hong Kong. Very small. Ooh, I opened a new tab. Very small in the grand scheme of things. So let's move back to the... I've got so many tabs open, it's hard to find the right one. Let's move back to that, and let's talk about the fact that there is a third China, which is Taiwan. So Taiwan, or the Republic of China, there's a lot of controversy around what you actually call it. I know, like, some pop stars are, like, denied access into the US, denied access into the mainland China if they, refer to it as the wrong name. There's a lot of, like, weirdities going on here, because basically Taiwan is what they like to call themselves, and China is also what they like to call themselves, but some of these names cause offense, and the reason behind this is because China wants to believe there is just one China, there is all of this, whole thing combined, and obviously because there's two governments that makes things a bit awkward. So this is why there is what is called a one China policy. The one China policy is that you can only, have diplomatic relations with either China or the Republic of China, or, Taiwan or China. If you have if you have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, then China will cut ties with you. And this is technically only kind of followed. Like, Taiwan has relations with a lot of parts of the world, but they're not a UN member to this day, one of the largest countries not to do so, because obviously, like, most countries aren't allowed to recognize them, which is the reason behind that. So really, that's what the play is all about. And the reason behind that, in case you're curious, is like, why is there two Chinas and why do they have to just pretend they don't exist? Basically, China, again, it was called something else at the time all of this went down. There was a giant civil war, and the currently in charge, or the people who were charged before the Civil War, actually fled to Taiwan as part of that. And even, because it looked like, it was still a civil war, for the longest time, despite only owning the island of Taiwan, the Chinese government in exile, or the Chinese government on Taiwan, actually had control, technically, of the Chinese seat on the UN, which meant they had access to the veto power, which is a really, really powerful thing. So yeah, basically, Taiwan had the Chinese power, like, of government, even though they didn't own most of China, until, like, 1971, when China got it back, and now Taiwan's the weird, like, oh yeah, you're not really a country thing. So yeah, the reason behind the one China the one China policy is because China's kind of objective is just pretend there is one China. They both kind of want a resolution, but they don't actually accept anything. Taiwan still claims that they own all of this, and China still claims they own all of this. And realistically, like with all these other situations, where they're just kind of like, oh yeah, let's leave that be, shall we? And let's just not rock the boat. And that kind of describes a lot of what's going on with China, in, not only in terms of these territories, but also in general. So that is Taiwan, and that is why that is so confusing. So just in case you are curious, because I know I was, I always just thought that was Hong Kong, because like, oh, maybe Hainan is, whatever it is. Hainan is just part of China, by the way. But this entire place right here, the South China Sea, the China is like all seas in general, because there's a lot of islands, and the islands belong to a lot of different people. There's a whole, like dispute going on there. And again, it's a key part of like international geopolitics that you just want to go, yeah, let's leave that be. And you can't really, because there's stuff going on there. But for now, yeah, that's what you need to know about the three different Chinas that aren't really China. So let's talk about the final China that's not really China, because it's a part of China by lots of definitions, but it's also really intriguing to me because it's a special economic zone. So China's economic system, I'm going to be honest, it's slightly above my understanding right now, but as I understand it is at least somewhat socialist/communist based, even if it's slightly more, market formed than before. However, there are special places where, called special economic zones where, foreign investment can come in, and like most of the world's products are produced in places like this or sold to people in places like this, and Shenzhen is the most famous example of this. So, depending on how you measure it, Shenzhen's population is generally over 10 million, sometimes a little bit less, like 8, but this still means that Shenzhen is around the size of London or New York. Again, giant world cities. What makes that so impressive to me is not the fact that, oh yeah, special economic zone, size of New York, pretty impressive, but bear in mind, in 1970, just 46 years ago, the population was 10,000. The population has literally multiplied by 1,000 in that space because of how much, economic activity this brought. They just built, building a city that fast is something that had never really been done before. Shenzhen is just this crazy example of that. And the cooler thing about this is the fact that it's on the Hong Kong border. So, yeah. Shenzhen, a city that came from nowhere. It's a special economic zone, which means lots of crazy stuff goes down, and it's kind of separate to the rest of China in that regard. There's a lot of other special economic zones, but Shenzhen is the most famous, the most well-known of them, and that's kind of that right there. So yeah, those are the 5 China systems I kind of meant right there. There is China, there's Taiwan, the Republic of China. There is Hong Kong, a specially administered or self-administered part of China. There is the autonomous province of Macau, which is like Portuguese China. And fun fact, I met someone from there once, and they were so impressed I'd heard of their country. There was like a full conversation starter. So boom. There you go, learning geography is useful for the real world sometimes. Then, there's special economic zones, there's a bunch of those, but Shenzhen's, again, there's the most famous one. You might have heard of the Shenzhen market or Shenzhen. Lots of stuff goes down in Shenzhen. And then finally, there is just the rest of China, the one China, which is actually like 5 different systems. And that is a whole big place that you could make a whole video, on, because there's so many provinces, there's giant ones, there's small ones. The difference between these places is so vast because 1 billion people live here, more than 1 billion people live here, which is just kind of nuts. And the final fact I'll leave you with before I just say, oh, there's so much I could say, but let's not, is the time zones of China. Because time zones is something which interests me greatly, because the world is roughly divided into 24 different time zones, right? However, China, because, again, they want to have one time zone, they have something called Beijing Time, which affects the whole country. So I'm going to try and find it right now. Again, I've got lots of tabs. Here we go, right there. So, as you can see, the world is roughly divided into 24 lines. It gets a bit jaggedy sometimes, like, for some reason, Iceland's like, yeah, let's take your time, UK, but it's fine because they're high up. And then, sometimes all of Europe's on the same time, which is, it's only like an hour, half hour each way. But China, if you look at it, should be 4 separate time zones. But because they want to be one united time zone country, they're all on the +8 time zone, which means that, imagine right now, okay, so it's midnight for me. It's really dark outside, but it got dark at 4 p.m. So if I lived on the far, part of China, it gets dark at 4 p.m., that's fine. But if I lived on the far west of China, west, I'm all for east and west, then that would be 1 p.m. that it's getting dark. And there's a whole range of issues for the western provinces. But long story short, China has one time zone, that's nuts. But it also has lots of places, and they're all worth visiting in their own right. And at some point, for the record, I'd like to go to all 4, or at least Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China in general. So there you go, fun facts about China. Hope you'll enjoy the video. Second channel, don't care. Bye.